룩명 외전에 오신 걸 환영합니다. 이왕에 오셨으니 구독과 좋아요도 눌러주세요.
Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to the channel just by clicking that red button down there so that you can keep up to date with what's happening.
There are various ways to pay your taxes in modern times. It either comes out of your paycheck before you ever see it, or you get a bill at the end of the tax sheet. Of course, the medieval era was devoid of this level of bureaucratic expertise, which begs the question, how were medieval taxes truly collected? What kind of things were subject to taxation, and how did a king collect taxes from his or her subjects? Well, different states in Europe had different degrees of centralization, which had an impact on how taxes were collected. We'll concentrate on the Eastern Roman Empire, commonly known as the Byzantine Empire, which covered thousands of miles and the entirety of the Middle Ages.
This is because the state had a high concentration of both urban and rural residents, making it well developed. So how exactly were these taxes collected? To everyone's surprise, the peasantry was the group that paid the heaviest tax burden. In the Byzantine Empire, taxes were levied in two main ways. The initial one was rent, which a peasant paid to their local ruler in exchange for the privilege of using land. The second was the tolumenon, a household tax that was paid to the government at large. Most of the time, the lord set the rent, which was based on the worth and productivity of the relevant land.
Central tax collectors would travel the empire and make an inventory of what each person had in order to determine the household tax. The lord was responsible for ensuring that the payment was paid after the tax collectors left and returned shortly after to collect the necessary taxes. To ensure that taxes weren't collected again, the tax collectors and the lord would both note how much was paid and who paid it before leaving. Peasants might now pay their taxes in one of three ways.
The initial one was just in coins. The second was in kind, such as giving away the worth of their produce in exchange, and the third involved providing free labor. And this was applied to things like building churches or public roads. In case you were wondering, the clergy and nobles were granted so-called privileges that lower their tax obligations. All of this gives the impression that the Byzantine Empire was able to tax the peasantry excessively, yet they were actually protected.
There were restrictions on the amount of taxation of the peasantry during typical peacetime because the administration was aware that a dissatisfied, unproductive peasantry would undermine the empire. However, since war was a frequent occurrence, special taxes may be imposed. The farm levy, an additional tax on agriculture, and the confiscation of church assets, mostly its gold reserves, were the most heinous of these. And each Byzantine emperor enjoyed this privilege because, according to the law, they owned the entire empire outright and allowed others to utilize it only with their consent. Taxation should have applied to everyone, not only the rural population.
The taxes of merchants and their trade was another significant source of income for the empire. Local nobility were not included in the taxation of the peasantry, which was instead the entire responsibility of the central government. The concerned peasant lords would then be compelled to collect the taxes and pay when the tax collectors came around the following time. Finally, that is how the Byzantine administration would gather taxes. Via state-funded bureaucrats who traveled the empire to evaluate land values and impose a tax in accordance with their findings. Despite the fact that tax rates varied by industry, region, and time period, one thing remained constant. Nobody wanted to pay them.